Welcome, NutritionRadio.org listeners. This is Lonnie Lowery, a university nutrition professor of over 20 years and podcast host of long-running shows like Iron Radio. Come on in. Weight management tips. Hey, everybody. As today's weight management tip, I'd just like to offer some hard facts about dietary fiber. Why am I doing this? I'm doing this because I just heard a podcast that was covering a quote-unquote internet feud on a fiber-based diet and then its detractors, right, the other side. The podcast was laying into this reportedly wealthy dietitian who created this admittedly pretty obvious and overstated diet, but they also seem to be a bit confused on multiple points, from governmental fiber recommendations to food and supplement regulations to what fiber even is. This is the downside, to me, of entrepreneurship, right? Where everyone wants to sell stuff or promote their brand. And what happens is then the public is left scratching their head about, what's going on? What's the truth? So let's go to the horse's mouth. We're going to look at some definitions about what fiber is, like right from the FDA and their big literature review. What can it do for you? That kind of thing. I don't want to get too far into the feud about the claims that are being made of this diet and this and that. It's just problematic. And don't even get me started on the internet stuff about, just like everybody's got a brand. People can't just be a person anymore. Oh, I am my brand. Well, how convenient and satisfying. So everybody's sort of trying to spin and sell. And I just want to share my experience. But if you have no background, if you have no education or experience with something that is successful, sort of externally validated experiences, extensive experiences, that can be damaging in itself. Even if you have that disclaimer, I just want to share my experience and I know nothing about it. Well, we have to be careful with that. So let's just go get some actual education here. Now, like you, I am often skeptical of the federal government. They're not the end-all be-all, but they are trying to use research here, and trust me, these documents are chock full of it, to try to balance industry's needs with scientific truth and consumer protection. So if we go, here's FDA.gov. If we just go to what is FDA's definition, you can just go look this up yourself, type in FDA definition of dietary fiber, what can be declared on the nutrition and supplement facts label. Here it comes. Dietary fiber that can be declared on the nutrition and supplement fact label includes certain naturally occurring fibers that are quote-unquote intrinsic and intact in plants and added, isolated, or synthetic non-digestible, soluble, and insoluble carbohydrates that the FDA has determined has beneficial physiological effects on human health. What are some of those effects? It could be lowering blood glucose because of their nature of forming a gel or interacting with the bolus of food that you swallowed. By the way, you can go check out some of our recent lecture episodes, classroom episodes on the digestive tract. It will help you kind of understand this a little bit better. But these effects could include lowering blood glucose, again, forming a gel and that sort of thing, and reducing cholesterol levels, reducing calorie intake. Yes, they can be filling. They can be a tool for the dieter. Most Americans certainly don't get nearly enough fiber. We'll get there in a minute, less than half in a lot of cases. And increasing the frequency of bowel movements, or what we call laxation, regularity. The FDA even recognizes enhanced mineral absorption with certain fibers, the ones that ferment, like inulin, right, from chicory root. Your gut bacteria get a hold of it, they ferment it into these short-chain fatty acids. Makes like a mildly acidic environment there, and it helps you absorb certain minerals like calcium, which can be good for bone health, of course. There's even some research out there about how the gut microbiota can ultimately affect mood or the immune function, the immune system. That's a little bit beyond what this FDA document is talking about right now, however. So what are the various fibers? Because the podcast I was listening to was a little bit confused on this issue. They mentioned, inulin as a technical name for fiber. Well, it's one of many fibers. The FDA back in 2016, they defined fiber. There were 7 different types of fibers. You might have heard some of these. Beta-glucan soluble fiber, you'll get that from oats. It's a particular kind. Psyllium husk, that's in some of those fiber powders. Cellulose, plant cell walls, guar gum. Guar gum is really very interesting in my opinion. It has a weird history because they tried to put it in capsules, and because it forms a gel, and I mean a thick, viscous kind of gel. you have to be careful. You don't block parts of your gastrointestinal tract, but hydrolyzed guar gum gets around some of that, and it can really help with satiety. In fact, the things you hear about fiber, if you look at the scientific literature, sometimes it looks a little mixed about how well it helps with hunger, but that's partly because different fibers have different functional properties. And guar gum, hydrolyzed guar gum, is something I'm interested in that regard. But pectin is on this list. Locust bean gum, you get the idea. There were quite a few that were laid down in 2016. After those 7, more were added later, at least proposed, and if the FDA is going to propose something, they're probably not going to challenge companies who actually include it as such. Alginate is on there. Here's inulin and inulin-type fructans. Inulin and inulin-type fructans, these are just little fructose units. And it depends on how long they are, these chains, right? These chemical chains here. But typically, these are the kinds of things that do ferment. Sometimes they can make you gassy. The very things that could be good for forming short-chain fatty acids can cause you to be gassy, and it's not for everybody. A lot of these fibers, I think, it comes down to what you can tolerate and that sort of thing. And if you're clever and you're thinking, hey, I thought fructose was bad, remember, these units are bound in such a way you cannot digest and absorb them. But yeah, they added 8 more, and then a couple years later, 2 more. Depending on the source that you look at, you could count up to 26 different kinds of these non-digestible carbohydrates. That's really the key, right? We don't have the enzymes in our digestive tract to break up these chains, glucose or fructose or different kinds of carbohydrate chains, break the units and absorb them into our bloodstream. They're not digestible. That's why they end up in your large intestines, and the gut bacteria get a hold of them and ferment them, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, this might be a good time to talk about how we used to, and I did this in the classroom, we used to just discuss about soluble and insoluble fibers as, the soluble ones form a gel and they do this and this and this functionally. They might help with cholesterol lowering, whatnot. And the insoluble fibers do different things, but we've really moved beyond that. Here's a quote from, this is Journal Animal Science Biotechnology. It's one of any of a number. This is a 2019 paper by Barbara Williams and colleagues. But I think they do a good job of stating it this way. One simple classification, which is commonly used, is to differentiate between soluble and insoluble fibers based on the ability to be fully dispersed when mixed with water. However, polysaccharides, right? So these multiple sugar chains, remember, you can't digest them, break them apart, and get them in your blood. But polysaccharides classified as soluble may be quite variable in their actual solubility in water. Further, both soluble and insoluble dietary fibers share many physical properties, including water binding capacity, the capacity to bind with minerals, and they go on to say their fermentability can vary according to their physicochemical properties individually, right, of each compound. So this soluble versus insoluble classification has sort of gone away, and now we're talking about functional fibers. How fermentable are they? What does each one of these things do in a physiological way? But all things considered, all these different fibers considered, how much do you need? Well, the daily value is 28 grams per day for adults. If you don't want to be ethnocentric here in the States and look at Institute of Medicine and the FDA and some of these different sources of these recommendations, the World Health Organization, a little bit higher, 30 to 35 grams per day, typically more for men, or better stated, upward adjusted for the higher calorie intakes. In fact, average intakes are more for men because we simply eat more. It's not like we're, more conscientious trying to get that healthy dietary fiber. These doses and recommendations are something else that I think gets confused in podcasts and whatnot. Like, what's really high fiber? At what point is it a problem? That kind of thing. There's a lot of individual tolerance. I know there's some of these different types of fibers and we'll say alternative carbohydrates in some of these protein bars. I can only eat about half of a Quest bar and I have to sit it down and go eat the rest later. It's not even the sugar alcohols. But in any case, the average person, based on NHANES, right, the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, they do these really broad, get the fingers on the pulse of America. Imagine like the Google trucks driving around mapping America. These guys kind of do that with health behaviors, lifestyle behaviors. They suggest that people are getting about half of the recommendation. And again, it differs by age group and men versus women, but there's no way we're getting that recommendation every day of the 28 to 30, or for guys, maybe even 35 grams per day. That's an amount that is usually recommended. Remember, fibers aren't digestible, so they're filling and they don't provide many calories. It'd really be almost no calories except they get fermented, and ultimately it ends up being about 2 calories per gram for fibers, but even that's going to differ a little bit. So the take-home message, what can you do? Check out some of these resources. The FDA resources here are really quite good. See what different individual fibers can do. Ask, right? Ask someone at your local university, the nutrition department if you have to, or someone that you know is knowledgeable about digestive physiology. Maybe it's a gastroenterologist or a dietitian or whoever it may be, someone that you trust as a source to help you interpret, because there are so many kinds. I can see why people get confused. But there's the truth, right? You can handle the truth. It's just complex. And if you want this kind of evidence-based straight talk, please subscribe, whether it's iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, or leave a review on iTunes. Very helpful as well. And we'll see you next time. The NutritionRadio.org podcast is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, check with your physician, nutritionist, or qualified exercise physiologist in order to make the progress that you need.